Hello everyone, welcome to my channel about writing stuff. My name's Camille and today we are talking about naming characters and places, specifically in a secondary fantasy world. So if you're writing contemporary or some other genre set in our world, then this video on essentially creating names may not be for you. So let's get into it. The first thing you want to ask yourself is how important is naming in your world? And what I mean by this is there are several authors who I've heard talk about naming, and their stance is, it's not important, don't waste your time on it. Whereas I've heard other authors say, no, it's very important. Names are a big deal, they inform your character, etc. So when I'm approaching naming characters and things in my world, I treat it like world building. And what I mean by this is, for example, in Robin Hobb's Assassin's Apprentice, her high blood noble characters, their names actually inform their character. So naming for her in her world was very important. Similar for Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicle, naming is a type of magic in his world. So the names of things were very important and were treated as such. So that's something you'll have to decide for yourself. In the secondary world, are names important? Another big thing too is you don't want to obsess over these things. No one is going to care about your awesomely named character if your character is flat. So just a good rule of thumb, and my best advice I can give on naming is to treat naming like world building. If it is important to your world and the way your world works, if you have a lot of cultures and a lot of languages, then you will need to spend an exceptional amount of time on naming. And what I usually do is I create my characters, my character guides first, and I do most of my world building first before I start naming things. Because in our world, history and culture and character can really inform names. When your parents named you, they knew what their culture was, they knew what their mother tongue was, they came from a background of perhaps family names. For example, my older sister was given my mother's middle name, and all of these things influence names, and it will be the same in your fantasy world. So if you have this world building done first, and you know the cultures, and you know the languages, and you know who your characters are, naming will be a lot easier. So usually what I do, I like to have a baseline for any form of world building that I'm doing. Same thing with naming. And my baseline is something very simple. I go online, I look for lists of baby names from all cultures around the whole world, and I just pick the ones that I like, no matter how mundane they are. I keep a log of these things so that I can reference it and adapt them to fit my world. That's really all you're doing. You can create names from scratch, but I find it easier to adapt names and sounds and spelling that I already like. So, for example, in one of my books, I have this language called Sura, and one phonetic piece of this language is that I have this combination of letters. It's IET, so it makes this hard ET sound. And this letter combination is so common that you would probably find it in at least every sentence. So I created this character in this culture that is her mother tongue, and I knew who the character was and all these things beforehand. So I was trying to make a name for her, and one of the names that I had on my baby names list was Greer, which I loved. But instead of essentially stealing that name from this world, I adapted it. I changed her name from Greer to Griet with that hard IET letter combination so that it reflected that Sur language and that culture where that language is spoken. And when you do these sorts of things, when you take pieces of the languages that you create and you put them in names, your reader will make the connection that that character is part of that culture or that they have ancestors from that culture, so that when this character was named, all of that was referenced, all of that came into play. And your reader is a lot smarter than I think authors give them credit for. And the human brain looks for patterns even when it's not trying to. So if you have, characters speaking this language in this book, and then you have a character with these somewhat obscure foreign letter combinations in the name, your reader will make the connection that's where a character is from without you having to say it outright. And that's why I like to do my world building first. That's why I like to build my character guides and know who they are first, so that I can make these subtle connections in the world, and the reader will pick up on these things. It adds a lot more depth to your world and to your character that way, in my opinion. Another thing that I like to do when creating names is reference the history that I have. I like to have historical figures, historical religious figures, historical political figures in my fictional world. And in one of my books, I have this historical figure. I wanted to give her a somewhat obscure name, and I really liked the sound of Oracle, especially because this character could see the future. She'd have visions and this sort of stuff, but I didn't want to just call her Oracle because that's very mundane. So I changed it up a little bit and made her name Akalet. And this character is very pinnacle in this world. There are stories and songs about her. So one of my other characters in this book, she ended up giving birth to twins, and she wanted to name her twins after this pinnacle historical figure. So she split the name Akalet into Auckland for the boy and Alouetta for the girl. And this is where we get to sort of nicknames. I had found the name Alouette on one of those listed baby names, and I really liked it, but I wanted to make it just a little bit different, so I changed it to Alouetta. But if you are going the route of having these long names with a lot of syllables, chances are your character will be called by a nickname. That's how it is in our world. That's probably how it will be in your fantasy world. So instead of people actually calling her Alouetta every time they talk to her, her nickname is Letta. Her friends and some close family call her Letta, and then she has an uncle who calls her Aloe. So my characters, I have Auckland and Letta named after this Akalet character. And I never say these things explicitly in the book because, like I said, our readers are smarter than we give them credit for, and they will pick up on these things, if not the first time they read it, then the second time. And that's what I love about doing this in-depth interconnection world building, is you want your readers to read your book not once, but multiple times. So, on the second read, on the third read, it's good to have these subtle things going on in your world that your reader can pick up on as they reread your story over and over. All right, so surnames. In our world, or at least where I'm from, children get their last name from their father or from their mother if the father is not in the picture. And, these last names come from just centuries and centuries of history. You could go back and find the lineage of your last name to get better insight on this sort of thing. But instead of creating, centuries and centuries worth of history to get these accurate last names, I usually if I'm going to give a character a last name, it's going to be somewhat of a title that speaks to who their people are or where they're from in the world. For example, that Akalet character that I had, her people were the Sur people from the north, and she had 3 distinct abilities. And in my language I created, Sura, the phrase AI means 3. So her last name / title is Acer. So her full name is Akale Acer. But that name is very long and it's very odd. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. So when people reference her, they just call her Akale. But her full name is Akale Acer. Her offspring, who pretty much rule the country now, that is their surname, that is their title. They are of Acer blood, so they are already above the general members of society. Now, if you have a secondary fantasy world where you don't have languages, then you would probably take a different approach. And not all of my characters in my world sort of reference this long cycle of creating names and referencing languages. Some of them are just really simple. For example, I really liked the name Lachlan when I was looking through lists of baby names. So I literally just changed up the spelling. I did a double C consonant in his name, which is a common thing in my Sura language, but really you can just do anything. If you like a name, you can just change a letter here or there, change a sound here or there. Another thing you can do for this too, if you don't have languages in your world, is read some old myths and legends. For example, I came across this one legend with a character named Caradwin, which I love that name. Just the letter combination, the phonetic sound was really intriguing to me. I changed the K to a C, and then since it's a longer name, her friends and family call her Care or Carrie, but her name is Caradwin, which is a little different, a little obscure, so it fits in a fantasy world. So if you're creating surnames without having a language in your world, a good thing to do too, if you have several people from the same culture, you can add like a prefix to their name. In Irish or Ireland, there's the MC, the Mick, so like McGreevy, McFarland, same thing with the O, like O'Neill or O'Patrick. Or there's the Del for Spanish, Italian, Del Rey, Delfino. And just, this 2-3 letter prefix in front of a surname, if 2 people have the same prefix in front of a surname, it's likely that they are from the same culture or that their languages came from a similar root language, like Spanish and Italian is to Latin. Let's see. If you're creating legendary characters in your world or mythical characters in your world, you can always do the so-and-so the brave or so-and-so the fox. In one of my stories, there is this magic called singing. So there is a mythical character in the history of my world who is named Solon the Singer, because that's what he was. He didn't have a surname, but he has a title. All right, so cities and countries. This takes us back to do your world building first. A big thing for me for naming cities and countries is agriculture. So if you know what the agriculture looks like, that's a good way to sort of devise a name for that place, or to know who founded it. Those are the 2 most common ways places are named in our world, is what does agriculture look like, and then who actually founded the land. For example, I have a city in one of my worlds. It is in the middle of a forest, and the city was founded as a lumber yard. So I named the city Copus, which means something along the lines of like trees being cut back or something. Plus, I like the name. In another one of my worlds, the city is divided into 4 parts. So I have a formal name for it, but the slang name for it is the quarters. And if you have a major city like that with the vast close-knit population, slang is a good way to go for names too. You know, where I live, we call the closest city the city. We don't usually call it by its given name. And places, other places. This goes back to agriculture, where this place is in your world, plus like stores and businesses. I have a river in one of my worlds. At the peak of the river, there's an olive press, so there's usually olive oil running in the river, so it's called the Olive River. Simple, easy. I have a business in one of my worlds. It is a brewery slash, you know, tavern or whatever you want to call it, tap room. But it's in a city where this binding magic is very commonplace, and this tavern sells both bindings and beer, so it's called the Brew and Bind. Simple, easy. It really just comes around to do your world building first, know your characters first, and these names will come to you. Stay away from common names. There are some names in our world that you can take and put into your fantasy novel, and it will work. But the things that you want to stay away from, that you want to do some research into, are names like the name Mary. If you take the name Mary from our world and put it into your fantasy world, that will be jarring to your reader, because the name Mary is very much tied to the Bible. It is very much a biblical name, and you're not going to have Christianity in your secondary fantasy world. But if you like the name Mary, if you like the sound, just change a couple letters and things like this. Another example is the name Samuel. It's another biblical name, very much tied to Christianity, but in The Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien has a character named Sam, but his full name is not Samuel, it is Samwise. So if you want to have sort of this commonplace name or this common nickname, just change it around to not make it obscure, but weird enough to where it's not jarring to the reader and so that it fits in your world. Another thing to avoid is do not create these long, awkward names with hyphens and apostrophes. That's something I see a lot in fantasy, and I usually skip over it because it's phonetically, it does not make any sense. And then you have characters who are calling their best friend by this really long, difficult name to pronounce, when in reality, that person would have a nickname. If you want to have these long, obscure names, these long, obscure official titles for your characters, that's fine, but give them a nickname, because in the world, that's normal. That's what people would actually do. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I got. If you have a personal question on something or someone you're trying to name, or if you would like me to comment on any names you're questioning, drop them below. My resource for this week is to go to Google or go to Pinterest, find lists of baby names, and make a log of the ones that you love and keep those close by. A shout out to Cedric for this video request. Thank you very much. I do have clusters of videos planned for the future to do things on character, things on plot, but I do like breaking up the monotony with these sort of intriguing, mysterious videos. So if you are in the middle of drafting, or if you are in the middle of revision and you would like help with something, drop a comment below and I'll see if I can dig into it and do a video on that. All right, that's all I got for you guys this week. I will see you all next time. For now, you should be writing stuff.